Thermal optics. In the past few years, we have seen the power of thermal optics and what they bring to either the battlefield or even for the civilian side of things. However, one of the biggest barriers, of course, was the price range. A lot of thermal optics are in the 3, 4, 5K price range. And with that came a lot of curiosity of what do some of the budget offerings bring? So today we'll be taking a look at the Sightmark Wraith, which is one of the budget offerings to the thermal optic world. But first, full transparency. So, all cards on the table. Sightmark did reach out and they asked if I'd be interested in taking a look of one of their offerings. After browsing their catalog, I was really interested in their thermal offering because I saw it as a very attractive price point and I wondered if it was up to snuff. There's no money that exchanged hands. They gave me the optic, I get to keep it, and I do the review and a couple shorts for them. Now that that's out of the way, let's jump into the rest of it. Now doing a quick breakdown of this optic and its usability. As far as setup goes, very simple. All it takes is the one bolt that goes through and it just attaches to Picatinny. You've got your controls up top, battery compartment, which we will talk about in a little bit, your focus lens, which does have a kind of a cheap throw lever, but if you ended up breaking that, you could always just put on your own. More than likely, you can just do it with like a hose clamp or something like that. And then you've got your two lens covers, which are spring loaded. It is a very compact size, which makes it easy to throw on almost anything. What I really appreciated about it, it's not some Mongo long optic or really chunky. It's just like a short, compact, kind of maybe a little bit larger than the standard ACOG. So it fits onto most rifles, even with limited rail space. Now, this is rated all the way up to 308. Currently, I've got it outfitted on an RFB. I tried to set it up on my Ruger Precision as well, but it just didn't feel as right. I didn't like to set up too much. The length of pull for this, I really needed the optic really close. Like many other thermal offerings, there is a wide variety of color palettes that you can use on this optic. However, not all of them are really useful for like a shooting scenario. I think most of the time the white hot and black hot are the best thing to use. But what I do wish it had is a red highlight for the warmest parts of what you're looking at. Some of the higher end models have that. I don't know if that's just because they can't program it in here because of price to keep it a little bit more affordable, or if it's just maybe something that they overlooked. Either way, I would really like that because most of the time when you're looking at it at a scene just like this, you can see a lot of the same color. So it'd be nice to find the things that is the absolute hottest point. The rainbow is a really fun one. It's cool to see how much differences there are. But when you're actually running and gunning or trying to pick up a target very quickly, most of the time it just muddies the waters and makes it a little bit harder to pick up your target. So for most more practical applications, I would recommend using the black hot or the white hot, whatever your preference is. Usually, depending on the scenario, one is a little bit better than the other, so cycle through. There is the green, magenta, rainbow, black hot, and white hot. I'm not gonna bore you too much on specs because for the most shooter, they don't know what all those means. And for me, I'm still very new to the thermal realm. So most of it kind of goes over my head as well, but I will pop them up onto the screen for you so you can see those. There are a couple of specs to pay attention to, and the Sightmark Wraith doesn't offer the best in any of these categories, but that is to be expected because it is a much more of a budget offering. But what is very important to know is the fact that it is not the best of all these metrics, but it certainly isn't the worst or unusable. It's hovering right around that cutting edge of where something is good without jumping in price too much. Now, one of the biggest pros of this optic is of course going to be the price. It is a very attractive price point, hovering right around the $1,500.
Nope. It is now closer to $1,000 to $1,200.
There's a lot of people online that say, don't go below $2,500 or else the thermal optic that you're gonna use is absolute trash. And I can tell you, I honestly don't agree with it. Now, of course, I am not a pro hunter, I am not a pro shooter or anything like that, but I do a lot of coyote hunting, and I can tell you if you stay within a certain range, this is going to perform admirably for you for the price range. So it is very attractive, but it is still very expensive, especially considering you can get a really good piece of glass for that price. And so you have to ask yourself, is it worth it to buy this $1,500 thermal scope over some other nice piece of more traditional glass? That is gonna be up to you. If you're shooting long range and that is what you're doing, 500 yards plus, I would say get a better piece of glass. But if you're shooting 500 yards and in and want to do maybe some hog hunting or some predator hunting, anything like that, and you want some thermal on top of your rifle, I think this would be a pretty good option. A pro of this optic is the fact that it is a pretty compact design. It's about 6 inches, which honestly, massive by some standards, small by others. That one might not make the cut. Anyway, with this sort of platform, you're gonna have plenty of rail space. It just takes the one pick mount point. So even with a very compact platform, you can get it in there without any problems. So as far as usability is concerned, something that you will have to get used to with any form of thermal or digital scope is when you are looking through the scope, it is going to be a square because it is a screen instead of a piece of glass. And so with that comes just a slight change in how your brain works sometimes. For me, I always have to get used to it because I expect to see a circle, but it's not that big of a deal. With that, you do have to have your eye relief set up well. On this RFB, I've got it set as close to me as possible, so all the way on the end of the rail. That way I can get a really good sight picture. Now, they do offer a little bit of an attachment to make it a little bit easier to use it and get set up for the eye relief. I've been using digital scopes long enough that I really didn't like it, and those things kind of just annoy me, especially when you're shooting with glasses, so I ended up ditching it. But if you like it, go ahead and put that piece on. Now, as far as your ability to pick up targets, that's kind of gonna be dependent on the area that you're in. For me, I live in a desert, and so anytime during the warmer months, there's so many hot rocks, everything looks like a heat source. Now, even with the more expensive thermal offerings as well, it does have this drawback. This is just one of the natural drawbacks of thermal. And so you do have to pick a scenario that you're going into it for. For me, in this desert, it was kind of hard to use it during the daytime in the heat of the summer. When it was 105 degrees out here, everything was blazing hot, and so anything that was warm out there didn't really stick out if it was smaller than like a foot or two, because that's really what all the size of the rocks worked out to. But as you can see in this inset footage is when you saw someone like a human at 100 yards, it did stick out quite a bit. So of course you can still detect it, but it just depends on the size of the game or whatever it is that you're hunting and trying to shoot for. If you're in a cooler environment, especially with areas that has a lot more trees than it does just open areas with rocks, then it is going to excel. But for these types of places like I'm in, not quite so much. But as it has cooled down, I can tell you it has been a little bit easier to pick up those targets because the temperature of whatever you're hunting, it is going to be a little bit hotter than anything that's going to be around it at the time. So while this only offers 16 times digital zoom, it is still very, very serviceable and will serve you well when you're out here shooting to 100 to 300 yards or so. Now, if you're trying to zoom in on this tiny little target at 600 yards, it's gonna turn into a bit of a blob on your screen, but that's just gonna be the way it is. That is a drawback, of course, and it does have some price limitations, but for the price, still very usable. I have shot out to 1,000 yards with a digital night vision scope. Now, it wasn't as clear as some of the other stuff, but it is totally possible. So oftentimes people talk about digital zoom being all bad. Digital zoom is not as good as a regular optical zoom, but saying that it's unusable or worthless just isn't true. Now, right now we've got a target at 100 yards. We're going to just go ahead and use this with its built-in 2x magnification here. So here we've got our target at 100 yards. Gonna go ahead and land our shot. Hits. Gonna go one more time. Hits. All right. Now we're gonna go ahead and zoom that in, and boy, oh boy, is that making it a lot easier to see and have follow-up shots. Here we go. Three quick succession hits. Now, digital zoom is not as good, but it is not worthless. Now, as far as some comparisons, it's pretty close with the AGM Rattler from everything that I've seen and the research that I've done. Now, that's another more budget offering that I know a lot of people like, and there are a lot of people that just shy away from Sightmark as well because it does have a reputation of being a little bit more of the airsoft quality, because you do see a lot of the cheaper red dots. In regards to zeroing this optic, it works just like any other digital scope with what they call a one-shot zero or single-shot zero, which it's not really a one-shot zero, but if you are bench rested, then it makes it really, really easy to sight in, especially if you've got a nice backdrop or a berm where you can see your shots are going into. So what you're gonna do is you're gonna aim at your target, and then after you fire, there's going to be a second reticle that you move to where your bullet actually hit. From there, you should be zeroed, but usually it takes another couple to get absolutely dialed. A very easy way to zero this is just to use a hand warmer or a cold water bottle. Some guys recommended just having a little bit of tin foil, which would reflect the ambient heat from above, and it would be a slightly different temperature, and you can zero in on that. I haven't tried that yet. I never brought out tin foil to shoot with, but as far as the water bottle technique, it was really good. Now, when you first pull this out of the box and you're gonna start looking, you might notice a little bit of lag. Now, that is not actually lag. That's going to be what they call NUCING. That does not mean you have a bad unit. That is something that is just indicative of thermal, which is just resetting the sensor so it gets the best image possible. Now, there's a lot more science to that. There's way more to it, but for just a regular shooter, just know that is normal. When you are first looking around with it, you're gonna pull it out of the box, you're gonna look around, you're gonna notice it shifting a lot. And that is just because everything you're looking at is changing very, very quickly, so it has to refresh itself a lot more. Once you are prone and set up and kind of scanning a landscape or a field, it is not going to be refreshing itself at that level anymore. So don't be too worried about that. Now, it does still happen. You're going to be looking through your scope, you're going to be a little bit dialed in, and then you're going to feel a little bit of a freeze, and then it's going to get going. It doesn't take long, maybe about a second or so, but I can tell you right before I pulled the trigger before, that has happened. But once again, that is just part of the thermal game. That is going to be one of the drawbacks you have with thermal. The refresh rate on this is 50 hertz, so it is going to appear smooth. Now, some people might view 50 hertz as kind of like a slow refresh rate, but something to consider is you're not going to be running around doing high-speed shooting with this with these quick target transition drills. You just aren't doing that with thermal. You're going to be set up, you're going to be prone, maybe you're going to have like a monopod or a tripod setup, and you're going to be scanning an area. So you really don't need that really fast refresh rate as if you're going to be shooting like Lucas Botkin from the previous T-Rex arms. As far as sensor bloom is concerned, this is how quickly your sensor is going to calibrate itself to whatever you're looking at. It takes about 2 seconds or so if you're, say, running and then going prone and then setting it up. But most of the time you don't need that really fast acquisition speed because you're going to be set up as well. So I see that as a little bit of a non-issue. But you can see in this inset footage here, I am pointing it straight up, and then I'm bringing it down at a pre-focused location, and it takes about 2.5 to 3 seconds for the sensor to fully resolve. Most of the time there's going to be a little bit of nuking that occurs, so the sensor is going to refresh and freeze just a little bit. But as I said before, this really isn't an issue with this sort of optic because you don't expect it to have a red dot style performance. You are going to be scanning areas, you're not going to be running and gunning with it. So I'm sure there's going to be some other sensors out there that change a lot faster, but you might be throwing a lot of good money away for something that you might not ever use. Now, the detection range for the Sightmark Wraith Thermal is around 1,500 yards. That is, it's going to detect some heat. But just because you can detect the heat, that does not mean you can ID what it actually is. Usually, as far as ID is concerned, it seems to be hovering right around the 300 yards range, depending on what you're shooting. If you're shooting some hogs, or you're just trying to ID people or larger predators, you're going to be able to ID it just fine for those ranges. But past that, it's going to be a little bit of a blob of heat, and you're not really going to know what you're shooting at. Behind me, you can see a mountainside, and it's hundreds of yards away. And with that, you can see all the heat with this inset footage here, and you can see the heat on the pass, on the rocks, and so you can tell it's very sensitive. It's also sensitive enough that even if you just have a simple touch of something, you can see the residual heat that your hand leaves behind, the little fingerprint that is left on a piece of glass or on a tabletop, anything like that. Very cool. Now, where does this optic excel? Any type of thermal, I feel like, is going to excel the best in a nighttime scenario when naturally everything is a little bit cooler. It operates in the same as far as daytime or nighttime. You don't need night vision or anything like that to use it because all it cares about is heat. But with the nighttime, there's a lot less ambient heat reflecting off from the sun or other sources. And so when you go out and it's late at night and the ambient temperature has dropped, especially in some form of desert dwelling like I am, sometimes I feel like I'm living on fucking Tatooine. Oh, your targets do stick out a lot. There's other people that are just in big grassy fields. The grass does not get as hot as some of the rocks in my area, so it's naturally going to excel in that environment. Something else to keep in mind is the picture quality. When you download the footage or the footage that you're seeing on the inset, the quality looks not too great. Now, something to keep in mind is you're watching that on a much bigger screen. There's a little bit of a loss from writing it to a card and then uploading it, and that is just going to be how it works. But something to keep in mind is you're going to be watching that on a tiny little screen. And so the smaller the screen gets, the better the picture quality gets if you're operating at a little bit of a lower res. And so when you're looking through this, it's not too bad, but when you are zoomed in, you're going to see some pixelation. But of course, we've already talked about that. What are some cons about this device? One of them being is as you start to get zoomed in, because of the sensor quality, it is not going to be as clear as some other offerings. But of course, that's partially just going to be because of the price. So to me, that is kind of fair. With a lot of these thermal offerings, you're going to have a very shallow depth of field, which means as you change target distances, you're always going to be adjusting that. So get very familiar with the controls. I wouldn't really call that a con, but it is something to keep in mind as you are operating this optic. Next thing to talk about is the battery compartments. This is an absolute con for me. I don't know why they set it up here or the way they set it up, but I hate it. If you're just bench rest shooting or something, it doesn't matter. But for me, the way I've got it set up, whenever I sling my rifle, if it hits just right, this is a spring-loaded cap. And so when you press it in, the lid pops off. And so there was a couple times when I was just walking around and the lid popped off and I lost the batteries for this. I only went through one full set of batteries and the rest that I lost somewhere out here. There's a few lithium-ion batteries just sitting here waiting to explode in the hot summer heat. That kind of sucks. So I don't like their battery setup. Sightmark, if you're watching this and there's a version 2, change how that works. It's very convenient because it pops up, you can change the batteries very quickly, but when you're using it in the field in more real life scenarios, LARPing in Minecraft, you're very prone to lose your batteries. So I have a strip of tape going over it just to hold it in place. You can also use like a rubber band or something like that, whatever you feel like is necessary, but I think the piece of duct tape is going to be your best offering. The next con about this is the brightness. It gets plenty bright, so you can use it in the bright desert, that's fine, but it doesn't get dim enough. When you're out shooting in the nighttime, which is really a great place for thermal because it doesn't care about daylight, it doesn't care about darkness, it just shows you heat, it's too bright. After looking to this all night long, it was just too bright. And so Sightmark, if you can have like a firmware update to make this like go even dimmer, because when you're shooting in pitch black, it's just uncomfortable to look through. So if you could dim that down a little bit more, that'd be great. That doesn't make it unusable, but it is just something that I will bring up as a con. As far as weight's concerned, it's about the same weight as an LPVO. As far as the user interface is concerned, it is very simple to use. There are a few more complex digital scopes. This does not fall under them. All you got to do is press the center button, the menu pops up, you see all your options, you can scroll through, select what you want, whether it be brightness, zeroing, or reticle changes or reticle colors. While we're talking about the reticles, you can choose a wide variety of reticles as well as reticle colors. You do need to be careful with the color of reticle you choose because based on that is going to determine your ability to see it depending on the color palette that you use. So my recommendation is find the color palette that you really like. Most of the time it's going to be white hot or black hot, and then choose a reticle color that sticks out to you the best. I think a red or an orange are going to be really, really good for that because it does have a lot of contrast with the black or white. All right, so let's talk about the durability of this optic. Overall, it does feel good. There are a few areas that I just know after a while are going to break. The lens caps, I've had a couple of these that are very, very similar on something like a Vortex optic, and they always break off if you're not very, very careful. So if you ever sling this with these open, you're going to break them off. So keep that in mind. Next is I'm very worried about this throw lever. This throw lever is made out of plastic and it does kind of jut out. So something to keep in mind here is it might break at one point in time. Now you can just fix it with like a hose clamp and modify your own. But if I were to change something about this optic while keeping the price very, very attractive, is I would reinforce this area because it is a critical area. I did not do any form of torture test on this. Now those are available online, but I really didn't want to do that because I know I would end up breaking it. The thermal optics and digital optics and honestly just scopes are not going to be as strong as some things like an EOTech. And we just have to keep that in mind. So with this, it is a bit of a sensitive piece of material, but it is built fairly well. This is made out of aircraft grade aluminum, so the body is solid, but it can still break. I by no means babied this. This was always on the back of my RFE and it kind of just threw it into the back of my car with steel targets or boxes of ammo, mags, camera equipment. all sorts of other guns that are always clinking around. I didn't break anything. You can see some scuffs here and there, but that really doesn't affect the performance one bit. As far as rating goes, this is rated for up to 308, so I wouldn't be putting it onto your 50 BMGs, and this did live most of its life on the RFB. I do kind of wish I put it on like a 5.56 gun, because I ended up shooting 1,000 rounds through this, and that cost a lot of money. 308 hurts my wallet, but it did hold at 0. I had no problems with it. The mount didn't change through any of this time. The battery life for this is about 3.5 to 4 hours. I really only got through one set of batteries because I kept ditching them because of the way the battery compartment is. But something to keep in mind is always keep some spare batteries on you. I recommend a Theorem cell vault, which you can strap to your belt or you can strap to your sling, which just holds some batteries. This takes CR123A batteries, so very, very common. The same thing that your EOTechs and most optics are going to take. So keep those on your belt, keep those on your kit. That way you can swap them out. And then, of course, tape it closed so you don't lose your batteries when you don't really need to. If you're going to be out there for a long time and you're worried about your battery life, or you're going to be out in cold weather when battery life always drops drastically, my recommendation would be to get some sort of portable battery setup and then attach it to your stock of your rifle and then plug it into your scope. You can do these with just regular phone chargers. You can get a really lightweight one. You can either Velcro it or Ranger band it to the stock of your gun, and then it's a non-permanent attachment. But if you need it, you can always just plug it in and get exactly what you need. So is this right for you? That is going to be a question that only you can answer, but I will give you these thoughts. If you're planning to shoot from 1 to 400 yards, maybe like some coyote hunting or some hog hunting, this will absolutely do the trick. If you're planning to do a lot of long range shooting past that, then I would recommend upgrading or keeping with a regular piece of glass. For a regular shooter, some average guy, kind of like me, this actually kind of rocks for the price. For how I plan on using this is going to be mainly coyote hunting, or maybe popping some rabbits out here. For that job, it's going to excel. Usually I'm shooting those at about 200 yards, for which this is more than capable of shooting. There's a lot of guys that want to be able to ID targets all the way out to 1,000 yards, but some of those guys can't even hit a target at 1,000 yards. You just kind of have to have a trade-off. What range are you actually shooting at? Well, everyone, thank you so much for joining me as we review the Sightmark Wraith Thermal. I hope this answered some questions for you. If you enjoyed it or you're new here, consider dropping a subscribe. We would love to have you here. Anyway, I will see you on the next one.